A sheriff's final confession. The mystery of the missing hikers' perfectly clean cars. Hello, and welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. We are the guardians of stories that crawl out from the deep, dark woods. The tales that park rangers whisper about after their shifts, the accounts that defy easy explanation, and the warnings that are passed down from one generation to the next. Tonight's protocol comes from a man who spent 40 years upholding the law in a town that bordered one of America's most serene, and ultimately, most terrifying national parks. He was a man of logic, of procedure, of evidence. But what he encountered at the edge of Blackwood National Park was something that no police academy could ever prepare him for. He calls this story The Janitor. And it begins, as these things often do, with a car. My name is it was Sheriff Brody. I'm retired now. Been that way for about 10 years. But for 40 years before that, I was the law in Havenwood County. It's a small place, the kind of town where you know everyone's name, their dog's name, and what they'll be ordering at the diner on a Friday night. We're nestled right up against the sprawling, majestic beast that is Blackwood National Park. For most of my career, the park was our biggest asset. Tourists, hikers, nature lovers, they were our lifeblood. But that all changed. It started subtly. So subtly, in fact, that for the first few weeks, I didn't even register it as a pattern. I just saw it as a string of carelessness. You have to understand something about a place like Havenwood County. For most of my 40 years as sheriff, life moved at the speed of a meandering creek, not a whitewater rapid. Our problems were predictable. A bar fight at the Tilted Axe on a Saturday night. A couple of high school kids trying to buy beer with a laughably bad fake ID. The occasional dispute between Old Man Hemlock and his neighbor over a property line that hadn't changed in 100 years. These were the rhythms of my life. They were familiar. They were manageable. The wilderness was always our backdrop. The great, silent expanse of Blackwood National Park was the first thing you saw in the morning and the last thing you saw before the sun dipped below the peaks. It brought us tourists, their dollars fueling our small economy. It gave us a place for quiet reflection. We respected it. We thought we knew it. But we were like children living at the foot of a sleeping giant, completely unaware of the dreams stirring within its deep slumber. The beginning of the end of that piece came on a Tuesday, October 7th. I remember the date because it was my wife's birthday, and I'd spent the morning trying to figure out how to bake the German chocolate cake she loved without burning the house down. The air outside was crisp and clean, the kind of autumn day that makes you feel alive. The leaves on the aspens had turned a brilliant, shimmering gold, and the sky was a deep, impossible blue. It was a perfect day, the kind of day that makes you forget that perfection is often just a mask for the grotesque. My deputy, a young man named Miller, got on the radio just before 11 a.m. Miller was a good kid. Eager. By the book. He'd come here from the city, thinking small-town policing would be a break from the chaos. Poor kid. His voice crackled through the speaker in my office. Sheriff, you there? I picked up the receiver. Go for Miller. What's the situation? Got a vehicle at the Osprey Point trailhead, sir. It looks abandoned. I leaned back in my chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. An abandoned car at a trailhead wasn't exactly a five-alarm fire. Abandoned how, Miller? Flat tire? Out of gas? Or are we talking about a couple of kids fogging up the windows? There was a pause on the other end. A beat of static-filled silence that was just a little too long. No, sir. It's just weird. I think you should see this for yourself. In my line of work, weird is a word that carries weight. It's a word that puts you on alert. A routine call is just a call. A weird call is a puzzle box that you might not want to open. I told Miller I was on my way. I put the half-mixed cake batter in the fridge and left my wife a note. I wouldn't be home for lunch. The drive up to Osprey Point is a winding, scenic route that I'd taken 1,000 times. The road climbs through thick stands of pine and fir, opening up to breathtaking vistas of the valley below. Today, the beauty felt different. A little colder. A little more watchful. When I pulled my cruiser into the gravel lot, I saw Miller standing beside a late-model blue sedan. A Honda Civic. It looked practically new, its paint job reflecting the golden leaves of the surrounding trees with a mirror-like clarity. Miller had his hands on his hips, his brow furrowed in a look of genuine bewilderment. All right, son, I said, my boots crunching on the gravel as I walked over. Show me what's so weird. He didn't say a word. He just gestured with his chin toward the car. I ambled over to the driver's side and cupped my hands around my eyes to peer through the window, cutting the glare. The first thing I saw confirmed my initial assumption of carelessness. The keys were in the ignition. Not just in the ignition, but turned to the on position. The dashboard lights were dead. The battery was completely drained. Okay, I said, straightening up. So, we got a couple of hikers. They were in a hurry, excited to hit the trail. They killed the engine, but forgot to turn the key all the way back. They left the keys, drained the battery. It's sloppy, but I've seen it before. I thought so too, Sheriff, Miller said, his voice quiet. But look closer. Really look at it. I leaned in again, and that's when I saw it. That's when the first icy tendril of unease snaked its way up my spine. The car was clean. Now, I need you to understand what I mean by clean. I don't mean that the owner was tidy. I don't mean not very dirty. I mean it was immaculate. It was so clean it felt wrong. It was a violation of the laws of physics. The dashboard, a notorious collector of dust, was utterly free of it. It had a deep, black, lustrous shine, as if it had been treated with Armor All just moments before. The digital clock was frozen at 3:17, likely AM, when the battery finally gave up the ghost. I moved my gaze downward. The floor mats. They were the standard issue carpeted kind, but they looked like they'd never been touched by a shoe. There wasn't a single stray pine needle, not a pebble, not a dried fleck of mud. It looked like it had been vacuumed by a surgeon. The seats were the same. Upholstery so pristine you'd hesitate to sit on it. No stray hairs, no crumbs in the crevices, no lint from clothing. The cup holders were empty and spotless. The little compartments in the doors, the places where people stuffed crumpled receipts and empty gum wrappers, they were empty. Sterile. I walked around the car. The exterior was just as baffling. The car had driven at least 20 miles up a winding, dusty mountain road to get here. It should have been coated in a fine layer of ochre-colored dust. It wasn't. The blue paint was gleaming. The tires, even the treads, were a deep, rich black, free of any dirt. The wheel wells were spotless. It looked like it had been teleported from a high-end detailing shop directly into this parking spot. "Miller," I said, turning to face him. "Did you run the plates?" "Yes, sir," he replied, flipping open his notepad with a slight tremor in his hand. "Registered to a Mark and Sarah Peterson. Ages 26 and 24. Address is in the city, about 2 hours east. No outstanding warrants, no flags. Clean record." "Clean," I muttered, the word tasting strange in my mouth. "And you haven't seen any sign of them?" Did a quick sweep. Shouted their names up the first quarter mile of the trail. Nothing. The trail register is empty for today, but that's not unusual. A lot of day hikers don't bother to sign in. I looked from the impossibly clean car to the dark, yawning entrance of the Osprey Point Trail. A 5-mile loop. Moderate difficulty. Thousands of people hiked it every year without incident. But the scene in front of me wasn't an incident. It was a statement. I just didn't know what it was trying to say. The logic of it was all wrong. Who drives to a trailhead, details their car to a fanatical, microscopic degree, and then wanders off into the woods, leaving the keys in the ignition? The actions were contradictory. The care taken with the vehicle was meticulous, obsessive. The carelessness with the keys and their own safety was absolute. We had no choice but to treat it as a potential search and rescue operation. Procedure, after all, is the handrail you cling to in the dark. I got on the radio and called it in. We were officially looking for 2 missing persons. The next 3 days were a blur of activity that yielded absolutely nothing. We brought in the county SAR team, a dozen experienced volunteers who knew these woods like their own backyards. Park rangers joined them. We grid out the entire 5-mile loop. We sent search lines sweeping through the underbrush, their bright orange vests stark against the deep greens and browns of the forest. We found nothing. I don't mean we didn't find Mark and Sarah. I mean we found no trace that anyone had been on that trail recently. No fresh footprints matching the high-end hiking boots their family later told us they owned. No discarded water bottle. No dropped granola bar wrapper. No snagged piece of clothing on a thorny bush. The trail itself felt sterile, unused. We expanded the search. We went off-trail, checking the steep ravines and rocky outcrops that flanked the main path. The trackers we brought in, men who could follow a deer through a stream over solid rock, were baffled. They found no broken twigs, no scuff marks on moss, no signs of passage. It was as if Mark and Sarah Peterson had walked to the trailhead marker and simply been lifted off the face of the earth. After 72 hours of fruitless searching, protocol dictates that the operation scales back. The chances of finding someone alive dropped precipitously after that point. We had to make the call. The volunteers went home, their faces grim with failure. The rangers returned to their regular patrols, though they kept their eyes peeled. The call to their parents was one of the hardest I've ever had to make. How do you explain to a mother that her daughter and son-in-law have vanished without a trace? I told them the facts as I knew them, that their car was found, and a search was underway. I left out the part about the car's condition. How could I explain that? How could I tell them their children's car was found in a state of impossible, terrifying cleanliness? They told me about Mark and Sarah. They were responsible, they said. Experienced hikers. They loved the outdoors. They sent me photos. A smiling, happy young couple, arms around each other, with a mountain peak in the background. When I asked about the car, Sarah's mother laughed, a sad, broken sound. "Oh, that Honda? It was Mark's baby, but Lord, were they messy. Always full of fast food wrappers and empty coffee cups." Sarah used to call it the rolling trash can. A rolling trash can. I looked at the photos of the car we had towed to the impound lot. It sat there under a fluorescent light, its blue paint glowing. It didn't look like a car anymore. It looked like a sculpture, a mausoleum. In the end, we were left with nothing. No victims, no suspects, no witnesses, no motive. Just an open case file and a single, baffling piece of evidence. a perfectly clean Honda Civic. At the time, I filed it away under unexplained. A tragedy, a mystery. I assumed it would be a story that haunted our town for a generation, a sad piece of local lore. I had no idea it wasn't a story. It was a signature, and the artist was just getting started. It wasn't an ending. It was a prologue. After we towed the Petersons' Honda to the impound lot, an uneasy quiet settled over Havenwood. The kind of quiet that follows a loud, unexplainable noise in the middle of the night. On the surface, things went back to normal. The leaves continued to fall, blanketing the ground in a carpet of red and orange. People went to work. The diner served its coffee. But the mystery of the immaculate blue car and its missing owners was a ghost that haunted our conversations. It was a question mark hanging over the entire county. I tried to rationalize it. 100 different theories played out in my head, each more unlikely than the last. A kidnapping where the perpetrators, for some insane reason, were obsessive cleaners? A couple staging their own disappearance, with the car being a bizarre, inexplicable calling card? None of it fit. The pieces didn't connect. So, I did what any lawman does when faced with a dead end. I filed the paperwork and I waited. I hoped it was a singular, tragic aberration. A story we would tell for years, shaking our heads in wonder. The waiting lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of deceptive calm. Then, on a cold Wednesday afternoon, the radio in my cruiser crackled to life, and the voice on the other end shattered that peace forever. It was Miller again, but his voice it wasn't the same. The youthful eagerness was gone, replaced by something tight and strained, something that sounded perilously close to fear. "Sheriff," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You better get down here. To the Serpent's Spine trailhead." He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "Sir, it's happened again." He didn't need to explain what it was. That single phrase, "it's happened again," sank into my gut like a stone. I didn't ask for details. I just put the cruiser in gear and drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Serpent's Spine was on the north side of the park. A much more remote and challenging trail, a grueling 10-mile ridge climb that only serious, experienced hikers ever attempted. It wasn't a place for casual sightseers. The scene that greeted me was a nightmarish echo of the first. There, parked perfectly between the painted lines of the small, deserted lot, was a vehicle. This time, it wasn't a sleek sedan. It was a beast. A big, black Ford F-150, lifted on massive off-road tires, with a heavy-duty winch on the front bumper and an array of KC spotlights mounted on the roof. It was the kind of truck that's built for mud and abuse, a vehicle that should, by all rights, be caked in a proud layer of dirt and grime. But it wasn't. It was shining under the weak afternoon sun. The black paint was so deep and polished it looked wet. The chrome bumper reflected my own shocked face with perfect, cruel clarity. Miller was standing beside it, looking pale and sick, as if he were guarding a tomb. "Don't touch anything, Sheriff," he said, his voice hollow. It's the same. Exactly the same." I approached with a sense of profound dread. I peered into the cab. The keys were there, dangling from the ignition. And the interior, it was an offense against nature. The heavy-duty rubber floor mats, designed to hold pounds of mud, snow, and gravel, were spotless. The kind of clean you couldn't achieve with a pressure washer. The dashboard was dust-free. The bench seat showed no signs of wear, no indentations, no stray fibers. The steering wheel, which should have had the worn patina of a driver's hands, looked like it had just been installed. There wasn't even a scuff mark on the plastic panel of the driver's side door, where a heavy hiking boot would have inevitably brushed against it. "Plates?" I asked, my voice coming out as a croak. Miller was already holding out his notepad. "David Chun, age 42. Lives alone, 3 counties over. No flags. But Sheriff, I know this guy. Or I know of him." He explained that David Chun was something of a local legend in the regional hiking community. He was ex-military, an expert survivalist. He ran a popular blog called Trail Nomad, where he documented his solo treks through some of the country's most unforgiving wilderness. He was the last person on Earth you'd expect to just get lost. "And his truck," Miller added, pointing at the gleaming black monster. He called it the Beast. It was famous. It was his trademark. And sir, it was always filthy. He had this whole philosophy about it. He wrote a blog post once, said a clean truck was a sign of a wasted adventure. He wouldn't have cleaned it. Not like this. Never. 1 car is an anomaly. 2 cars, with the same impossible, signature details, that's a pattern. That's a deliberate act. The feeling of facing a simple mystery was gone, replaced by the chilling certainty that we were dealing with something purposeful. Something that was following a set of rules we couldn't begin to comprehend. We launched another search. A bigger one this time. We called in resources from the state. We brought in canine units, a team of German shepherds renowned for their tracking skills. What happened with the dogs was, for me, more terrifying than the cars themselves. Each dog, one by one, eagerly picked up a scent from the truck. They led their handlers, straining at the leash, directly to the large wooden sign that marked the entrance to the Serpent's Spine trail. And there, every single one of them stopped dead. They didn't just lose the scent. They reacted with visceral fear. They whined. Their ears went flat. Their tails tucked hard between their legs. A few of them tried to bolt back to the parking lot, pulling their handlers with them. It was as if they had run into an invisible wall, a perimeter of pure wrongness that they refused to cross. Their animal instincts were screaming a warning that we couldn't hear. The search for David Chun was as fruitless as the one for the Petersons. We found nothing. An expert survivalist, a man who could live off the land for weeks, had walked past a sign and evaporated from the world. Now, the story broke wide. The local news, then the regional, then the national. They had a name for it. The vanishing hikers of Blackwood Park. They called our corner of the world the Mountain Bermuda Triangle. The theories got wilder. Alien abduction. A portal to another dimension. A serial killer with an extreme form of OCD. I had to stand in front of news cameras, looking composed, saying things like, "We are exploring all possible avenues and are confident we will resolve this." While inside, I felt like a fraud. We had no avenues. We had no leads. We had nothing but 2 impossibly clean vehicles and a pack of terrified dogs. The panic in Havenwood began to curdle into something uglier. Fear. Tourist revenue evaporated overnight. The motels were empty. The diner was quiet. People started locking their doors in the middle of the day. They looked at the park, at the beautiful, majestic mountains that had defined their lives, and they saw a predator staring back. I knew I was missing something. The answer, or at least a clue, had to be in the cars. The cleanliness was the signature. It was the only thing the perpetrator the thing left behind. I needed someone to look at them not as a cop would, but as a scientist would. I needed to see what was there by seeing what wasn't. I called in a favor from an old academy buddy of mine who was now a division head at the state crime lab. His name was Jacobs, a brilliant, cynical man who had seen the worst of humanity and had a sarcastic comment for all of it. I told him I had a situation that was forensically unusual. That was the understatement of my career. Jacobs drove down himself, probably more out of curiosity than a sense of duty. I met him at the county garage where we were storing both vehicles under tarps. "All right, Brody," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Show me these ghost cars you're so worked up about." I pulled the tarp off the Honda Civic first. He just stood there for a moment, silent. He walked around it, his cynical smirk slowly fading from his face. He ran a gloved finger along the door, then looked at his fingertip. It was spotless. He whistled, a low, long sound. You weren't kidding. It's like it just rolled off the assembly line. For the next 6 hours, Jacobs and his assistant turned that garage into a laboratory. They went over every square millimeter of both vehicles with a battery of equipment I'd only ever seen on TV. They used electrostatic dust lifters, alternative light sources, and tools for collecting microscopic trace evidence. They swabbed the air vents, the seatbelt buckles, the space between the seats. They took samples from everything. When they were finally done, Jacobs came into my office. He slumped into the chair opposite my desk, took off his glasses, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The usual sarcastic glint in his eye was gone. He just looked exhausted and shaken. "Well," I prompted, my own heart thudding in my chest. He looked up at me. "Brody, I don't know what to tell you. There's nothing." "What do you mean, nothing?" I asked. "No fingerprints, I get that. The guy is meticulous." "No," Jacob said, shaking his head slowly. "No, you don't get it. It's so much worse than that. Of course there are no fingerprints. Not from the owners, not from the supposed killer, not from you or your deputy. None. Wiped clean. That's difficult, but possible. But that's not the part that's giving me a headache." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's no trace evidence. At all. No skin cells in the fabric of the seats. No hair follicles. Not a single human hair. No pollen from the outside air in the ventilation system. No microscopic clothing fibers. Brody, a person's car is a petri dish of their existence. It's filled with their biological and environmental debris. It's a microscopic history of everywhere they've been and everything they've touched. These cars, they have no history. They're sterile. They are forensically ghosts." He held up a hand to stop me from interrupting. I took a deep swab from the gas pedal of the F-150. The pedal David Chun, this big, rugged guy, would have been pressing with a muddy hiking boot. I should have found a treasure trove. Thousands of particulates. Soil from his driveway, fibers from his boot, DNA from his sweat. Brody, I found nothing. Not a single, solitary thing. It's not just clean. It's like it was never dirty. It's as if the people who own them were never even inside them. He leaned back, a look of genuine disbelief on his face. "I can't write a report on this. What would I say? The vehicles in question were found to be impossibly clean, defying the known laws of forensic science. They'd pull my credentials. I can't explain this, Brody. And to be honest with you, I don't want to." Jacobs packed up his equipment and left that evening. He never sent me a bill for his services. He just wanted to get as far away from Havenwood and its 2 perfect, silent cars as he could. I was left alone in my office, the silence ringing in my ears. The pattern was formed. The truth was undeniable. We weren't hunting a man. We were facing something that could not only remove a person from the world, but could also meticulously, impossibly, erase every microscopic trace that they had ever been there. And it was living in our woods. After forensic specialist Jacobs left, a new kind of silence fell over me. It was the silence of a dead end. The silence of a puzzle with no solution. My world, a world built on evidence, on procedure, on the logical progression from cause to effect, had been shattered. Forensics hadn't given me a lead. It had given me an impossibility. It had confirmed that whatever we were dealing with was not playing by our rules. The disappearances paused. The first heavy snows of winter arrived, blanketing Blackwood Park in a thick, pristine layer of white. The trailheads were officially closed for the season, the access roads blocked by drifts of snow. It was a forced quarantine, and the town of Havenwood exhaled a collective, shaky breath. We hoped the cold had driven the horror into hibernation. We hoped that with the spring thaw, things would return to normal. Hope, I've learned, is a dangerous thing. It makes you complacent. Winter in Havenwood was always a quiet time, but this year the quiet was different. It was heavy, suffocating. The two empty houses the Petersons' rented vacation cabin and the small home David Chun had owned on the edge of town were like open wounds. Every time I drove past them, I felt a fresh stab of failure. The town council was on my back constantly. What's the plan for spring, Sheriff? What are you going to do to guarantee the safety of the tourists we need to survive? I had no answers for them. How do you write a safety plan for a ghost? How do you post a warning about a force that can erase every trace of a person's existence? My nights became long and sleepless, filled with the image of those two gleaming, sterile vehicles. My days were spent staring at maps of the park, as if the topography itself could offer up a secret. It was on one of those long, dark nights, with the wind howling outside and my mind chasing its own tail, that I thought of Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a town institution, a relic from a different era. She was in her late 80s, sharp as a hawk's talon, and had lived her entire life in a small, secluded cabin at the very edge of the county line, where the town officially ended and the vast wilderness of Blackwood began. She'd been a park ranger for 50 years, just as her father had been before her, and his father before him. The Vancests didn't just live near the park, they were a part of it. They knew its secrets. Not the geological secrets you find in textbooks, but the older ones. The ones whispered in the rustle of the leaves and the cry of a loon over a still lake. If anyone had an answer that wasn't written in a police manual, it was her. I drove out to her cabin, my tires crunching on the icy gravel of her long driveway. A single warm, yellow light shone from her window, a beacon in the immense, pressing darkness of the forest. Before I could even knock, the heavy wooden door creaked open. Eleanor stood there, silhouetted in the doorway. She was a small, wiry woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were clear, dark, and startlingly intelligent. They held no surprise at seeing me on her doorstep after 10 o'clock at night. "Knew you'd be coming round sooner or later, Sam," she said, her voice a low, gravelly rasp. She was the only person in the county who still called me Sam. It made me feel like a kid again. The coffee's on. Getting out of the cold. Her living room was like stepping into a museum of the park. The walls were covered with hand-drawn maps, faded photographs of rangers from a century ago, and shelves groaning under the weight of books on botany, geology, and local history. The air smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and dried herbs. I sat in a worn armchair by the crackling fireplace as she poured 2 mugs of black coffee. I didn't know where to begin, so I just told her everything. I laid it all out. The Petersons' blue Honda, David Chin's black truck, the keys in the ignition, the disappearances without a trace. I told her about the dogs at the trailhead, their sudden, inexplicable terror. And then, I told her the part I'd told no one else, the part that kept me awake at night, the forensic report, the impossible, absolute cleanliness, the fact that, scientifically, those people had never even been in their own cars. She listened without interruption, her gaze fixed not on me, but out the large window that looked towards the dark, snow-covered mass of the mountains. She just nodded slowly, as if I were confirming something she already knew, a story she had heard long ago. When I finished, the only sound in the room was the popping and hissing of the fire. She took a long, slow sip from her mug. "My grandpappy," she finally said, her voice soft but carrying an immense weight. "He had a name for it. He saw it happen, twice, in his lifetime. Once when he was a boy, and once when he was an old man. But he never called it a who. He called it a what? A process. He called it the tidying." The word hung in the air between us. "The tidying?" I asked, the name sounding absurd and chilling at the same time. "Blackwood is old, Sam," she continued, turning her sharp eyes on me. "I don't mean the trees or the rocks. I mean the place itself. It's older than anything that grows on it. There are things in there. Presences, energies, whatever you want to call them. They don't operate on our terms. They don't think like we do. Most of the time, they sleep. But every now and then, something wakes them up. Grandpappy used to say that the woods they don't like messes." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Eleanor, with all due respect, people aren't messes. Awry, Sad smile touched her lips. Aren't we? She countered. Look at us from the park's perspective. We are the mess. We are loud. We are chaotic. We bring our bright colors, our strange smells, our noisy machines. We trample the quiet places. We leave our garbage and our scars on the trail. We disrupt the deep, ancient silence. For the most part, the woods tolerate it. They heal over our footprints. But the one he spoke of, he called it the janitor. My blood ran cold. The janitor. It's not a creature of malice, Sam. Not in a way we can understand. It doesn't hate. It doesn't feel anger or seek revenge. It is a function, a purpose. Like a scavenger is meant to clear away the dead, the janitor is meant to clear away disruptions. It finds an imperfection, a thing that is loud and out of place, and it removes it. It wipes the slate clean. Perfectly. Tidily. I shook my head, trying to cling to the rational world. The cars, Eleanor. Why leave the cars? And why clean them like that? Because the car isn't the mess, she explained, her logic both insane and terrifyingly sound. The car is just a metal shell. It's not part of the living, breathing system of the woods. It's the thing inside the car that draws its attention. The life, the noise, the messy, complicated energy of a person. It takes the person. It erases the disruption. And it's a tidy being, you see. It finishes the job. It cleans up the container they arrived in. It scrubs away every last trace of their presence, every fingerprint, every skin cell. It's not meant as a warning to us. It's a receipt. It's a sign that a piece of litter has been properly and thoroughly disposed of. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. This was the stuff of nightmares, of campfire tales told to scare children. I was a sheriff. I dealt with facts and evidence. Eleanor, I can't go to the town council and tell them a cosmic janitor is tidying up hikers. I can't put that in an official report. Of course you can't, she said, her voice softening with something like pity. And you can't fight it, either. There's nothing to shoot. There's no one to arrest. It's like trying to arrest the tide for coming in. My grandpappy said there were ways to avoid it. It's not always active. He said it was drawn to strong, vibrant emotional energy. The excitement of a couple starting a hike. The focused determination of a lone adventurer. The joy and chaos of a family. To the janitor, that kind of energy is like a bright, flashing light in a dark, quiet room. It's an invitation. A dinner bell. She leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto mine, her expression more serious than I had ever seen it. Close the park, Sam. That is the only thing you can do. Life you have to. Announce a rockslide danger. A fissure. A contagious blight affecting the trees. A problem bear. Anything. But close it. Keep people out. Because if you open those trails in the spring, the tidying will start again. And you don't know who it will take next. It might be a tourist. Or it might be someone from this town. It might be someone you know. I left Eleanor's cabin feeling like I was walking in a dream. My cruiser's headlights cut a tunnel through the oppressive darkness. But the real darkness was the one that had just been planted in my mind. Her story was insane. It defied every rational bone in my body. And yet it fit. It fit the impossible cleanliness. It fit the terrified dogs. It fit the complete and utter lack of evidence. It was a terrifying, folkloric explanation that made more sense than anything else. But I was still Sheriff Brody, a man of law and order. I couldn't shut down a national park based on a ghost story from an old woman, no matter how much it chilled me to the bone. I'd be laughed out of my job, probably committed. So I did nothing. I ignored the elder's warning. I clung to my rational world. I told myself that spring would come, and this would all just fade away. I was a fool. I was putting up a flimsy fence of denial against a tidal wave. And by ignoring her warning, I was personally signing the death warrant for an entire family. The worst was yet to come. Winter eventually loosened its grip on Havenwood. The snow receded up the mountainsides, melting into swollen creeks that rushed through the valleys. The first green shoots of spring pushed through the damp earth, and the air grew warmer, filled with the scent of pine and wet soil. With the changing of the season, a fragile, tentative optimism returned to the town. The trailheads were reopened. Maybe, we told ourselves, the horror had been a fluke of the autumn. A strange, dark season that had passed. I hadn't followed Eleanor's advice. I couldn't bring myself to be the man who shut down our town's lifeblood based on what I'd convinced myself was folklore. Instead, I did the only things a cop knows how to do. I increased patrols. My deputy Miller and I made our presence known at the trailheads. We put up new, larger signs. They were filled with pathetic, useless warnings. Hike in groups. Carry a radio. Do not leave valuables in your vehicle. Inform others of your route. Looking back, it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a picket fence. I was treating a fundamental aberration of nature like it was a common car thief. For a few weeks, it seemed to be working. People were hiking again. Families were having picnics near the park entrance. The cash registers at the diner and the motels started ringing again. I began to sleep a little easier. I began to think Eleanor's story was just Theta's story. That self-delusion came to a crashing halt on a Saturday in late April. The day was perfect. Deceptively so. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze carried the sweet smell of wildflowers. It was the kind of day that feels like a gift, the kind of day a family would remember forever. The Miller family, no relation to my deputy. A tragic coincidence of name were the picture of that perfection. They were from out of state, passing through on a cross-country trip. Tom, the father, his wife, Jessica, and their daughter, a little 6-year-old girl named Lily. I saw their picture later. Tom with a goofy, proud grin. Jessica with a warm, gentle smile. And little Lily, a bright spark with missing front teeth and pigtails, hugging a stuffed unicorn. They had come to Blackwood to see the famous Waterfall Bluff, one of the easiest and most popular trails in the park. It was less of a hike and more of a gentle, half-mile stroll to a beautiful, cascading waterfall. It was safe. It was for families. It was for children. They drove a silver minivan. The call didn't come until after dusk. The sun had set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and a chill was settling into the air. It was a park ranger, a young man named Peterson, another cruel coincidence of name, doing his final sweep of the day. His voice on the radio was shaking. He'd found a minivan in the Waterfall Bluff parking lot. Keys in the ignition. Completely empty. He knew our new protocol. He knew what it meant. This time, driving up the mountain road, I didn't feel dread. I felt a cold, hard certainty. I knew what I was going to find. When I pulled into the lot, the flashing red and blue lights of my cruiser washed over the scene, making the woods look like a place of violence and terror. And there it was, the silver minivan. It stood there in the gravel lot, silent and expectant. Under the strobing police lights, its surface gleamed with that sickening, unholy perfection. Every speck of road dust, every insect that had met its end on the front grille, had been wiped away. It was a flawless, silver monument to an atrocity. My deputy, Miller, was already there. He was a good 20 feet away from the van, just standing there with his flashlight beam aimed at the ground, as if he couldn't bear to look at it. As I got out of my car, he turned to me, his face as white as a sheet. "Sheriff," he said, his voice choked. "It's the same. But it's worse this time. So much worse." He then walked over to the side of the minivan, his movements stiff and robotic. He had opened the sliding side door before I arrived. He shone his flashlight inside, but then he turned his head away, unable to look. He said, "Don't, Sheriff. Maybe you shouldn't look." But I was the sheriff. It was my job to look. It was my job to see the things no one should have to see. I walked to that open door and aimed my own heavy mag light into the vehicle's interior. Of course, it was clean. The carpets were freshly vacuumed. The dashboard was polished. The upholstery was pristine. But it was the back row that made my heart stop. It's the image that is burned into my memory, the image that comes to me in the dead of night. There was a child's car seat strapped into the back. It was pink, covered with faded cartoon princesses and sparkly decals. It was installed perfectly, the safety straps pulled tight and buckled as if awaiting their passenger. And sitting there, nestled in the built-in plastic cup holder of the car's seat, was a small, plush unicorn. The unicorn. It was white, with a rainbow-colored mane and a single, spiraled horn. Its fur was pristine, unstained. Its two black plastic eyes stared back at me with a blank, placid emptiness. This was what broke me. This was the moment the rational man in me, the cop, died, and something else, something older and more afraid, took his place. A minivan with a 6-year-old girl in it should be a festival of chaos. There should be sticky fingerprints on the windows. There should be crushed goldfish crackers ground into the carpet. There should be a stray crayon, a dropped juice box, the happy, messy detritus of childhood. There was nothing, just a sterile, silent, gray interior. And that single, perfect toy, left behind like a final, mocking piece of evidence. A receipt, as Eleanor had called it. Proof of a job tidily done. Eleanor's words screamed in my mind. It's drawn to strong emotions. The joy and chaos of a family. The laughter of a 6-year-old girl chasing a butterfly. The love of her parents as they watched her. That beautiful, vibrant, messy energy had been a beacon in the dark. A dinner bell. I lowered my flashlight and stepped back from the van, a wave of nausea washing over me. Miller was leaning against his patrol car, his head in his hands. He was crying. I didn't blame him. I felt like the world had tilted on its axis. This wasn't a case anymore. This wasn't a mystery about missing persons. This was a violation. An abomination that fed on happiness. The news of the Miller family's disappearance hit Havenwood like a physical blow. Before, with the adults, there was fear. But with the child, with little Lily, the town's fear turned to a profound and bottomless grief. People openly wept in the aisles of the general store. The usual stoicism of our mountain community shattered. This was different. This had crossed a line. They looked to me. The whole town looked to me, their eyes filled with a mixture of terror, anger, and pleading. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. They wanted me to do something. And all I could offer them was silence. All I could see when I closed my eyes was that perfect, pink car seat and a single, soulless unicorn staring into the void. My failure was absolute. I had been warned. I had been given the answer, as insane as it was, and I had dismissed it in favor of my own comfortable, rational world. And because of my pride, because of my stubborn refusal to believe, a little girl was gone, erased, recycled into the fabric of the woods. That night, sitting alone in my office, the weight of that pink car seat pressing down on my soul, I made a decision. A switch flipped inside me. The rules of my world were broken, so I would have to break them too. I couldn't fight this thing. I couldn't arrest it. I couldn't understand it. But I would not feed it another soul. I was going to starve the beast. But before I did that, I had to do one more thing. One last, reckless, terrifying thing. I had to see it. I couldn't spend the rest of my life fighting a shadow. I had to look into the face of the thing that was so meticulously, so quietly, cleaning my world away. I had to know what I was truly up against. I had to go hunting for the janitor. There are moments in a man's life that divide it into a clear before and after. The side of that pink car seat, the empty space where a child should have been, was my dividing line. The man I was before that moment, the by-the-book cop, the rationalist, the man who believed the world operated on a set of understandable rules. She died in that parking lot. The man who was left was someone different, someone willing to step outside the lines, someone who understood that when you're facing an enemy that ignores the laws of man, you have to start ignoring them too. I concocted a plan. It wasn't a plan born of strategy or tactical genius. It was born of grief and rage and a desperate, burning need to know. It was reckless. It was stupid. By any sane measure, it was suicidal. And I told no one. Not my wife. I couldn't bear to see the fear in her eyes. Not Miller was a good deputy, but he was a kid, and this was not a burden he needed to carry. And not Eleanor. She had given me her warning, and I feared she would try to stop me from doing something so foolish. This was a reckoning I had to face alone. The following night, I waited until the moon was just a pale, thin sliver in the sky, offering no comfort and little light. I didn't take my official cruiser. This wasn't police business. This was personal. I took my own truck, a beat-up, 10-year-old Chevy Silverado. It was the antithesis of the cars I kept finding. Its dashboard was permanently filmed with a layer of dust. The floor mats were caked with dried mud and dog hair from my old golden retriever, and the cup holders were sticky from years of spilled coffee. It was a well-used, well-loved, messy human vehicle. It was, I hoped, the perfect bait. I drove it up the winding road to the Osprey Point trailhead, the place where it had all begun with the Petersons' blue Honda. I pulled into the empty gravel lot and killed the engine. The silence that descended was absolute. It was a physical presence, a weight that pressed in on my eardrums. The forest that surrounded the lot wasn't just dark. It was a solid wall of black, impenetrable and ancient. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct I had, every shred of self-preservation, was screaming at me to put the truck in gear and drive away as fast as I could. I ignored it. I took a deep breath, the cold night air stinging my lungs. Then, with a deliberate slowness, I performed my own profane ritual. I left the keys in the ignition, just as they'd been found in the other cars. I took a half-eaten bag of potato chips from under my seat and tossed it onto the passenger side. I added an empty soda can for good measure. I wanted to make my truck as untidy, as human, as inviting as possible. An offering, a mess waiting to be cleaned. Finally, I pushed the driver's side door so it was left slightly ajar, a clear invitation. Then I gathered my own tools. Not my service pistol. I had a chilling certainty that bullets would be useless against whatever was out here. Instead, I took my high-powered hunting rifle, more for a sense of security than any real expectation of using it. My most important piece of equipment was a pair of military-grade night vision goggles I'd bought years ago for hunting coyotes, and a small, handheld radio, just in case. I slipped out of the truck and melted into the woods on the opposite side of the parking lot from the trailhead. I moved slowly, silently, every snapped twig under my boot sounding like a gunshot in the profound quiet. I found what I was looking for about 100 yards away, a thicket of dense pine trees on a small rise, offering a clear, unobstructed, and hidden view of my truck. I settled myself at the base of a large pine, the rough bark digging into my back. I flipped the night vision goggles down over my eyes. The world dissolved into a grainy, luminous, sickly green. My truck stood in the center of it all, a ghostly green silhouette. And then I waited. For the first hour, nothing happened. The world was frozen. The only sounds were the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears and the whisper of a slight breeze moving through the high pines. I started to feel foolish. A grown man, the county sheriff, hiding in the bushes, hunting for a ghost from a folktale. Maybe it was random. Maybe it only happened on certain nights. Maybe it wouldn't come. Then, the world changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A sudden, drastic drop in temperature, so intense that I could see my breath plume in the green-lit view of the goggles. The gentle breeze ceased. It didn't just die down. It was cut off, as if a switch had been thrown. A complete and total silence descended, a vacuum of sound so profound it felt like the universe was holding its breath. And with the cold came a smell. A strange, clean, chemical scent that had no place in a forest. It was antiseptic, like ozone after a lightning strike mixed with the sterile bite of bleach, and something else, something like damp, freshly turned earth. I scanned the edge of the woods, near the trailhead sign. My hands, I realized, were shaking uncontrollably. And then I saw it. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a man or a beast. It was a lack of things. A patch of air near the trailhead began to shimmer, to warp, like heat haze rising from hot asphalt. But the air was freezing cold. The shimmering patch was vaguely humanoid in shape, perhaps 7 or 8 feet tall, but it had no features. No head, no limbs. It was like looking at a tear in the fabric of reality itself. A mobile hole in the world. As it moved, I realized what I was seeing. It wasn't camouflaged. It was erasing what was behind it. The trees and bushes visible through the shimmer were distorted, their textures and colors bleeding into a formless, blurry smear. It didn't walk. It didn't run. It glided. It flowed over the gravel of the parking lot towards my truck with a silent, fluid grace that was utterly unnatural. I watched, my breath hitched in my throat, as the grass and weeds it passed over seemed to lose their essence. For a moment, they would blur, their definition and color gone, before snapping back into sharp focus after the distortion had passed. My hand was gripping my rifle so tightly my knuckles were white, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was useless. What would I shoot at? A cold spot? A shimmer in the air? The distortion. The janitor reached the driver's side of my truck. I watched, mesmerized by a horror that defied all description, as it seemed to phase through the partially open door. It didn't push the door wider. It simply passed through the metal and glass as if they weren't there. For a long, agonizing minute, the truck sat there, silent. The shimmering was no longer visible. It was inside. Then I heard a sound. It was faint, but in the dead silence of the woods, it was as clear as a scream. Squeak. A wet, deliberate, wiping sound. Squeak. Squeak. Through the night vision goggles, I stared at the passenger side window. I saw the bag of chips I'd left on the seat. And then I saw it unhappen. It didn't burn up or crumble. It didn't vanish in a puff of smoke. It simply dissolved. It faded from view, pixel by pixel, like a poorly deleted image on a computer screen. One moment it was there, and the next, there was just an empty, clean vinyl seat. The soda can did the same, its red and white label dematerializing into nothingness. A soft, continuous whirring sound started, like 1,000 tiny brushes working at once. I watched, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing, as the film of dust on my dashboard vanished. The dog hair that was woven into the seat fabric just ceased to be. The sticky coffee rings in the cup holders disappeared. The smudges and fingerprints on the inside of the windows were wiped away by an invisible hand. In less than 5 minutes, the cluttered, messy interior of my beloved truck was transformed. It became a sterile, pristine showroom model. Perfect. Empty. Soulless. Then, the shimmer flowed back out of the truck, passing through the closed passenger side door. It glided to the driver's side. I watched as the door, which I had left ajar, began to swing shut. It moved slowly, silently, with no visible force acting upon it. It closed with a soft, final, definitive click. The job was done. The entity paused. It turned its formless shape away from the truck and towards the trailhead, as if contemplating the path into the deep woods. And in that moment, for a fraction of a second, the shimmering wavered. The distortion flickered, like a bad television signal. And in that flicker, I saw what was inside the void. It was not emptiness. It was a collage. A flowing, shifting, nightmarish amalgam of the things it had cleaned. I saw a flash of red and black plaid, the pattern of a hiker's flannel shirt twisting and swirling like oil on water. I saw the unmistakable tread of a hiking boot, the rubber melting into a slurry of pine needles and wet leaves. And then, for one heart-stopping, soul-shattering instant, I saw a face. It was the face of a young woman, her features crafted from compressed soil and shimmering granite, her mouth open in a silent, eternal scream. Her eyes were hollows of shadow. It was a face I recognized from a photograph on my desk. Sarah Peterson. Before I could even scream myself, her face dissolved, pulled back into the churning, cleansing void from which it had momentarily emerged. My God, it wasn't just erasing them. It was absorbing them. It was taking them apart, piece by piece, and weaving them into itself, into the fabric of the park. They were literally becoming the wilderness they had come to admire. The ultimate, most horrific form of recycling. The shimmering entity, the janitor, glided onto the trailhead and was instantly swallowed by the oppressive, absolute darkness of Blackwood Park. I didn't move from that spot until the first gray light of dawn broke over the mountains, my body shaking with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. I knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that Eleanor was right. You couldn't fight this. You couldn't reason with it. It was a force of nature, but a malevolent one, a hurricane with a purpose. My war was over before it began, but I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't kill the monster, but I could starve it. The sun rose, and the world returned to its normal colors. The sickly green of the night vision goggles faded from my memory, but the images they had shown me were burned there forever. I stumbled out of the woods, my legs stiff and my mind numb, feeling 1,000 years old. My truck stood in the parking lot, gleaming in the morning light as if it were a prize on a game show. The sight of its perfection filled me with a profound, soul-deep revulsion. I opened the door. The interior smelled of ozone and bleach, that same sterile, chemical scent I'd smelled in the woods. Everything was perfect. The dashboard shone. The seats were immaculate. The floor mats were spotless. It wasn't my truck anymore. It was a monument to what I had seen. It was evidence of an impossible truth. I got in, the key still waiting for me in the ignition, and I drove back to town. The drive down the mountain was a blur. My mind was a storm. I saw the shimmering distortion, the dissolving potato chip bag, the silent closing of the door. But most of all, I saw the face of Sarah Peterson, her silent scream crafted from earth and stone, subsumed into that churning void. It wasn't just killing them. It was unmaking them. It was a form of cosmic vandalism on the human soul. I parked the truck behind the station, away from prying eyes. I walked into my office, sat down at my desk, and I knew, with the kind of clarity that only comes after staring into the abyss, that my career as a traditional lawman was over. You can't uphold the laws of man when you've seen them rendered meaningless by a force of nature. My duty was no longer to solve crimes. My duty was to prevent them. And there was only one way to do that. I had to lie. I had to build a wall around that terrible truth, a wall made not of bricks and mortar, but of a plausible, believable, and utterly fabricated story. I had to commit the biggest and most important deception of my life. That morning, I started making calls. I called an emergency session of the Havenwood Town Council. I called the regional office of the National Park Service. I called a geologist I knew at the state university, a man who owed me a favor. I called the state's Environmental Protection Agency. I began to construct my fiction, piece by piece. 2 days later, I stood before an assembly in the town hall. The room was packed. My whole community was there, their faces a mixture of fear, grief, and anger. News cameras from 3 different stations were set up in the back, their red recording lights like malevolent eyes. I stood at the podium, in my full sheriff's uniform, and I lied to the people I had sworn an oath to protect. I did not tell them about a shimmering janitor that feeds on human energy and tidies up the wilderness by erasing people. I told them that, in the course of our investigation into the disappearances, we had brought in specialists to survey the park's unique geology. I told them that these specialists, using ground-penetrating radar, had discovered a series of deep, extensive, and previously unmapped limestone cave systems beneath the park. I explained that these formations made the ground highly unstable, prone to sudden and catastrophic sinkholes. Then, I layered the lie. I told them that biologists, testing samples from the few accessible fissures, had discovered a rare and highly toxic subterranean fungus. I gave it a scientific-sounding name I'd invented the night before, Stachybotrys geomaniliformis. I said this fungus released neurotoxic spores that, when inhaled in concentration, could cause rapid onset of confusion, severe disorientation, hallucinations, and paranoia. I stood there, looking into the faces of my neighbors, and I connected the dots of my fabrication for them. The disappearances, I said with feigned confidence, were no longer a mystery. They were a chain of terrible, tragic accidents. Hikers, I explained, must have unknowingly inhaled the spores. In their confused and hallucinatory state, they would have wandered off the main trails, stumbling blindly through the woods until they fell into one of the deep, unstable sinkholes, their bodies lost forever in the labyrinth of caves below. It explained everything. It explained why no bodies were ever found. It explained why even expert survivalists could get lost. It was scientific. It was logical. It was terrifying, but it was a fear they could understand. A tangible threat, not an unknowable horror. My lie was bolstered by the experts I had brought in. The geologist, prompted by me to survey areas I knew had some minor instability, produced a report filled with cautious language about potential geological hazards and karst-like features. The EPA, given samples of a harmless common mold I'd scraped from a damp cave mouth, issued a public health warning about unidentified airborne fungal spores and recommended avoiding the area until further study. It was all half-truths and academic hedging, but woven together, it created a tapestry of credible danger. The official recommendation was unavoidable and absolute. Blackwood National Park was declared indefinitely closed to the public, effective immediately, due to extreme and unpredictable geological and biological hazards. The federal government, faced with a potential legal nightmare of liability, acted swiftly. They erected massive, 10-foot-high chain-link fences around the entire perimeter of the park entrance. They posted huge warning signs every 50 feet. Red signs with stark white lettering: danger, unstable ground, biological hazard, authorized personnel only. They were emblazoned with biohazard symbols and the universal icons of a skull and crossbones. They bulldozed the trailheads, turning the entrances to Osprey Point and Serpent Spine and Waterfall Bluff into impassable mounds of dirt and rock. The access roads were gated and locked, with warnings of federal prosecution for trespassers. The lie worked. The wall was built. At first, my town was furious with me. The closure of the park was an economic death sentence. Motels closed. The diners struggled. Guide services went out of business. People lost their livelihoods, their homes. They called me a coward, a villain. They said I had destroyed Havenwood. They accused me of inventing the story to cover up my own incompetence, my failure to solve the cases. I didn't defend myself. I let them shout. I let them hate me. I attended the town meetings and absorbed their anger and their blame in silence. It was a heavy price, but I knew what I was paying for. Every insult, every accusation was a brick in the wall that kept them safe. I served as sheriff for another 10 years after the closure. The town, resilient as it was, eventually found new ways to survive. A small logging operation opened up on the other side of the valley. A few light manufacturing businesses moved in, drawn by the cheap land. The anger against me slowly faded, hardening into a kind of grudging, resentful acceptance. My lie became the official history, the boring, sad truth taught to a new generation of children. The story of the vanishing hikers and their impossibly clean cars faded from news reports into a half-forgotten local legend, a strange footnote to the story of the day our park was condemned. I'm an old man now, retired for a good while. I live in the same house I always have, on a hill overlooking the valley. From my front porch, if I look through my binoculars, I can see the fence line. A long, ugly, rusting scar on a landscape of breathtaking beauty. Sometimes, at night, I sit out here and I look at those dark, silent mountains. And I know what's still in there. It's not sleeping. I don't think it sleeps. It's just waiting. It's a patient thing. It has all the time in the world. It's a tidy creature, and it's waiting for the mess to return. I know that my lie, that ugly, necessary fence, is the only thing keeping it hungry. I am the guardian of that lie. It is my penance for my pride, and my final duty to my town. It's the last, and most important, case I will ever have as the sheriff of Havenwood County. Sheriff Brody's story is a testament to the idea that some doors are best left unopened, and some places are not meant for human feet. He became a villain in his own story to save it from a monster he knew it could never defeat. Thank you for joining us at the Wilderness Protocol. If you appreciate these stories from the dark and forgotten corners of the map, please support our work by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new protocol when it is declassified. Be careful where you wander. The woods are deep, and they hold many secrets. We'll be here to share them. Until next time, stay safe and stay out of the dark.